Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Supporting Students After Crisis and Loss, uh, another 2011 ASCA webinar. My name is Jeff Broderson. I'm here to help you with any technical issues, and I will also ask your questions for you. You will not be able to speak, but please feel free to ask questions in the question area below. I'd like to introduce Robin Gurwitch, who is a clinical psychologist and is a professor in the Department of Pediatrics at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. There, Dr. Gurwitch is the program coordinator for the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement. Dr. Gurwitch specializes in work with children, particularly those considered at risk. Since the April 19th, 1995 bombing in Oklahoma City, she's devoted much time to understanding the impact of trauma and disaster on children and ways to increase resilience, including stressors related to military deployment. She served on state and national committees and task force focusing on trauma, disaster, terrorism, and resilience. She has published numerous scientific articles and book chapters and developed materials on these issues. She's co-authored an intervention manual for use with young children after disasters and trauma and programs for the American Red Cross. And before we get started, what we're going to do is we're going to put up two polls. I ask that you please answer them as best as you can, and then we'll get started. So here comes the first poll. And I apologize to Cynthia. I forgot to put student on there. I suppose that's another good one. Okay, so it looks like most everyone's responded, so let me close this poll and I will open up the other. Okay, everyone was pretty quick about answering that one, so I'm going to stop that poll as well. And it looks like everyone has had a chance to support students, and that we have a very even split as to who's in the meeting, with 41% from elementary, 36% from middle, 47% secondary, and then 3% are college counselors and 7% are district level. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Robin, and please, everyone, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right. I hope y'all can hear me. If not, let Jeff know. I have to say this is a first for me, and it is really strange to be talking to my computer and not seeing any faces. So, wow, I guess I could have done this in my pajamas. I don't know. I am really excited to be here and actually talking to you about how to support students after crisis and loss. Let me see if I know how to do this, move it forward. I guess, as Jeff said, I did not start out in this area. I actually started out working with children with significant behavior problems, all those kids that get referred to you every single day, and was really serving as a consultant for the Office of Child Care and the Department of Education in Oklahoma around young children with severe behavior problems when the bombing happened in Oklahoma City. That pretty much changed my life, and I joke, although there's some truth to it, that I think they called me because they didn't have anybody else's name in their Rolodex. And that changed what I do, and I became very much involved in research and program development and clinical services for children that were impacted by the bombing in Oklahoma City. So, and I will say that in graduate school, I didn't get a lot of training in how to support children after losses or crisis. Okay, now I've got to figure out how to move this forward. I think that from your response to the polls, and Jeff and I talked about it before we started, I think it really underscores the fact that loss is very common in the lives of children. The vast majority of children experience the death of a family member or close friend by the time they complete high school, with 5% of children experiencing the death of a parent. So there is going to be, unfortunately, in any given school year, a child that experiences a loss. And it may also impact your school staff. They may have a death in their family, or a school teacher or staff member may also die. So that is likely to happen. I think the other issue, as we talk about crisis, it's been an interesting year. Everything but plagues of locusts, I think, have hit this country in ways that have been unparalleled. Tornadoes, hurricanes, floodings, wildfires, droughts. So, and then the economy is really causing a lot of distress in many families, and that affects the children. If we think about bereavement, as you can see from the slide, this was a survey that was conducted with New York City Public Schools. And they were asking about exposure to traumatic events before 9/11 happened. And you can see those numbers are pretty high. So you may be thinking, well, that's New York City. But that second set of numbers, that is from a study that was done in the Midwest. So I think it really tells us that it doesn't matter quite where you're surveying children. Children are experiencing crisis and loss situations on a fairly regular basis. So one of the biggest changes that's taking place is moving from people going to an office setting for counseling services to really coming to get the services in schools. And that makes sense, particularly now with people searching for jobs or working jobs. To be able to take off and go to an office for an hour a week is not as feasible for many families. And if we think about why child care facilities, why schools, well, that's where kids are. Children are spending most of their time there. For the majority of children, it's a place that they can feel comfortable, they feel safe, they feel secure. It also allows counselors and others to really screen large numbers. So if we tried to figure out who needed what services after a crisis hits a school or after a death impacts the entire school community, it's hard to say, oh, well, Johnny does and Susie doesn't. So if we can screen kids, we may be able to better allocate our resources. We may be able to see larger groups of kids in need, and we can do that better in schools rather than waiting for one at a time to show up at an office. There is still stigma associated with mental health. I wish it were different, but it's still there. And when there's stigma associated with it, then the likelihood that individuals are going to seek services go down, right? So there's nothing wrong with my child. The whole idea of you have to be crazy to go to a counselor. And so when we offer services in the schools, families are much, much more likely to agree to those services. Excuse me. Schools are trusted by most families, and so if the school says, I think this is something that can help your child, or here's an idea for your child, they're much more likely to participate in programs that will help kids, their children. And I think it's important to consider what kind of programs are available, what kinds of things are there before as well as during and after any traumatic event occurs. If the school is the place that I can turn to, I'm much more likely to make sure that my child gets the services. And you can serve families as well. There is an impact of death on children in many areas. Certainly academics takes a hit. We'll talk in a second about feelings and reactions of children, communication. And for children that you're already seeing in services, those children are going to be at increased risk. They're already struggling with some difficulty to come to see the counselor. I don't say, you know what, life is great and wonderful, and she just seems like a really nice person, or he seems like he's approachable, I'll just go spend my lunch hour with the counselor. It would be nice if that happened, but usually the people that are coming to see you in schools or at college are much more likely coming to see you because of some distress in their life. So if we think about how does trauma impact learning, what we know from several of these studies, I'm not going to read the slide to you, but we see changes. We see changes in IQ and reading and grade point, in school absences. And then you have a lot of other issues, particularly important for those in the high school setting, that you end up with children that are more likely to be in trouble. And when you get in trouble a lot and expelled a lot, the graduation is likely to go down. So trauma really does impact learning on a whole host of areas. So if we can take time in schools to give the children the services they need or to support them after a crisis, after a trauma, after a loss, we're also going to be able to turn around and support their overall academic functioning and help them really meet their potential. We think about different possible reactions that children may have after a crisis or a loss. What we know is that they can be thought of to occur in different domains, and I'm just going to talk in general about the changes in behavior. Well, actually, I'd take that back, because I have control of the button, right? Worries and fears are the most common reaction. That children may become very distressed after a traumatic event, after a crisis event. And the big worries are around safety and security for themselves and the people important to them. And that changes with age. So for those of you in elementary school, the early elementary school students are mostly worried about themselves and their closest family, maybe their best friend, maybe their brother if their brother was nice to them that week. But their sphere of worry is a little bit smaller. As children get older, that sphere of worry about how an event can impact people gets larger. So as I get through elementary and into middle school, my worries extend beyond the family to my friends and my whole school community, maybe my neighborhood, maybe my whole community in which I live, and it continues to grow. So by the time you're into college, really the worries about how does this impact gets much larger, and they begin to have some concerns about individuals that live far away, individuals that may be touched by similar problems internationally. I think we all looked at the trifecta of disaster in Japan with the earthquake, the tsunami, and the nuclear problems, the nuclear emergency, and our heart went out to the Japanese the whole country. And I think for very, very young children, that worry they're so far away wasn't as intense unless they were directly impacted by knowing somebody or having relatives there. But by college age, by high school age, my worry becomes much larger. As we think about the current wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, worries about soldiers are something that we hear a lot from children, particularly those that are in middle through college. So if you take a look at these changes in behavior, take a look. What do you see? If I tell you that there's a kid in your school that's having problems getting their work done, they're not concentrating, they have poor attention spans, they're more hyperactive, they're having problems with peers, we've been conditioned to know that all of those things are signs of ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's in all the magazines, it's on all the talk shows. If your child has these things, they may have ADHD, and you need to talk to your doctor. And think about free samples of Adderall, Strattera, Concerta, and Ritalin. The problem is that all those changes in behavior are also things that we see with children that have experienced a crisis or trauma in their life. And all the medication in all of the land is not going to fix that. So we have to think through, you know, if you have a 13-year-old that all of a sudden is showing problems with getting their work done and problems with attention, problems with concentration, and all those other signs that are signs and symptoms of ADHD, but those haven't been there before, ADHD is highly unlikely. You don't wake up one day with ADHD. As parents will tell you, my child was running before they walked. And so you will have some children, at 3 to 5% that have ADHD, if they experience trauma, they experience a loss, you may see an increase above their norm of ADHD, but really think about what other things have been going on. I know that after many crisis situations, many disaster situations that affect school communities, there's a big increase in referrals to school counselors for please assess this child for ADHD and learning disabilities. Very important to ask what other changes have you had in your life. Very important to ask about exposure to any kind of disaster that you knew hit your school community or any losses that child may have had. That may help you think through, where do I start the assessment. If we think about grief reactions that may be misinterpreted by caregivers and teachers, and that's where I think counselors can really step in and provide some information. It's that difficulty concentrating and being disorganized at home. Sometimes students of all ages will have more difficulty being left alone. They may be more aggressive in their behaviors. We expect that in young children, so they may go back to wetting their pants or sucking their thumb. But we also see it in older children, even college students, that may act a little bit younger than their age. They may become more self-centered. That's very, very common after a crisis. Sometimes you will see children that will cry and there doesn't seem to be a trigger for it. They may idolize or imitate a person that's died, or may become a class clown or class bully. One of the things I showed on the slide before was those physiological changes, and that is often seen by increased stomach aches, headaches, vague aches and pains. So you may want to coordinate with your school nurses if there's been a community crisis, a community disaster, what's happening about visits to school nurses or absenteeism. You may see children withdrawing from old friends, being more irritable with their friends, and parents being more irritable with their school teachers. And in general, you may see some changes in school performance, where there may be a brief decline in grades. And I think that's so important for us to consider, that we may have some children who are coping with grief, that are coping with the trauma, that their grades are falling. And so they may go from being an A student to a B student or a BC student. And if parents aren't aware that this is common, and it's relatively, for most children, somewhat transient, they may become very agitated with their student about grades. I think the other group, there's a very small group of kids that you also want to pay attention to, whose grades all of a sudden go up. And my guess is, as school counselors, you rarely get a call that says, I need to make a referral to school counselor because this child is studying all the time, grades are up, and they've gone from B's and C's to A's, and they're on the verge of making the honor roll, and I need you to see them, something's wrong. We don't get those calls. Parents don't call in concerned about that. But there are a small number of kids that after a crisis has touched their life will work very, very hard to get back that sense of control and stability, and I can do that with my schoolwork. I am in charge of that. So what you'll see is sometimes I don't want to go play with my friends because I might have a pop quiz next week. I'm working on a paper that's due in 2 weeks, so I'm not going to do something that I previously enjoyed. So if you see those kind of changes in behavior, please attend to those children as well, because they may be hurting just as much as the child that's acting out and having problems with school behavior. There's a range of reactions to crisis and loss. A lot of times we think PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, if there's been any kind of traumatic event. But I think we also have to look at other issues. Bereavement certainly is one. How did children cope with grief and loss? But there's secondary losses that we have to consider. Relocations. I think about all these families that have been impacted by the floods, and that relocation, what that's like to move to a new city, to move to a new school, to have to develop new friends. So their peer network is compromised, putting them at risk for difficulties. If I leave a community and I have to relocate for whatever reason, it may be because dad died, and we have to go live with grandma in another state. Maybe the parents got divorced and the child has to go somewhere else. For a whole host of reasons, children may lose their supportive network. And it's not just their peers, but it's the teachers they know. It's the scout leader, it's the dance instructor. There are many, many losses of supportive adults. And I know there's just a small percent of you, but I really want to underscore for those counselors in college what it's like to go away from college and then have a large-scale disaster hit their community, what that's like. So I just got back recently from Joplin, and the tornado hit Joplin on graduation night. Thank goodness they were holding graduation ceremonies outside of town at a larger place, because the high school was completely destroyed. But when we were there, we talked about needing to make a connection back to those children in Joplin that graduated and went on to college, because they must be feeling very, very separated and isolated as the school year is starting, and they are not in their community anymore, but are in a new setting, in a new environment. You may see some academic failure. You may see more bullying. There's oftentimes with crisis and loss economic stresses, and when there's economic stresses, that usually creates more family stresses. And when there's more family stresses, there's usually more behavior problems. So it would be great. Wouldn't our life be easier in mental health if kids just would wear the jacket that tells us what we need to know? But unfortunately, they don't. What we do know is that as adults, we are not very good at picking out which children need services. And this comes out over and over and over again in the research. It happened after Oklahoma City, some of our work. It happened after very similar work after 9/11. In large-scale disasters, adults are really not good at identifying who needs what. And there's many reasons, and it's not anybody's fault. It just is. So again, kids don't have, I should have put up how many people are parents, but if you're a parent, think about it. You did not get a manual that told you this is what you should do if your child's been exposed to a trauma, that you can turn to Chapter 5 and look and see and know what the symptoms are to look for. So you're doing the very best you can, but you may not know what to look for. Some symptoms are very difficult to see. So how do you know if a child's feeling numb inside? How do you know if they're feeling anxious? So if you can't see it, then you really can't say if a child may be struggling. Some families use the hope and pray method. If I hope and pray hard enough that my child will be okay, then maybe they will be. You have many children that work very, very hard when they see their parents distressed. I don't want to make it worse for them, so I'm going to be strong. I'm going to stand up and protect them from distress. I remember watching a special that Peter Jennings did after 9/11, and he was asking families how they were doing, and there was a family with a 15-year-old and a mom, and I don't know, I can't remember where Dad was, but he wasn't there. I can't remember if he died or whether he was deployed or what, but he was not in the family. And Peter Jennings asked the mom how she was doing. And the mom said, I am really struggling. I'm crying all the time. I can't seem to get anything done. I'm just at a loss. I feel like I'm walking through a fog. Thank goodness for my daughter. She's my rock. I can talk to her about everything. She's there for me all the time. She gets things done for me. She's helping out with all the housework and chores. I don't know where I'd be without my daughter. And Peter Jennings turns to the daughter and says, and how are you doing? And she said, I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. And my thought watching this is, who's taking care of that 15-year-old? So I think sometimes children will work very hard to protect others in their lives. If a parent is really distressed, then I am going to have a hard time. If an adult is really distressed, then this includes school personnel. If a teacher is very distressed after a disaster or a death that struck the school community, then they may not be able to see the distress in the children as they're coping and struggling. There's a lot of pressure to return to routine, and although routine is important to recovery, important to healing, it's one of those things that routine is necessary, but it is not sufficient. One of the biggest challenges is how do you talk to children about difficult topics? And there's an idea that you just wait for children to bring up the subject because then you'll know that they're ready to talk about it. Well, if we wait for children to bring up the subject, then we're also sending a message that may not be intended, that we can't talk about it. It is too hard for us to deal with. So I think it is really important that we bring up the subject, that we let children know that we're available to talk. Many children, particularly by the time you reach adolescence and then into college, that they want to be the same. They don't want to stand out. I was living in Chicago when the goth movement began, and it was like every goth wanted to look different and be unique, but God forbid that they look different than anybody else, so they all look the same. And that happens with difficult situations as well. Communication may be poor. Parents may not always tell you what's going on at home, and teachers may not come to you with problems that they see in the children. And again, that stigma of mental health. So if we think about students that are at higher risk, I think there are many, particularly after a loss, and that's why I chose these. Certainly, as you would expect, students that were close friends of the deceased are going to be at higher risk for emotional distress. But also check about students who may have shared a class or an extracurricular activity. Maybe I was in no classes, but we played on the football team together. Maybe I wasn't in any classes, but we both like to draw anime at lunch. There are students that may have had a troubled relationship. Maybe they bullied this student, and now the student is dead. Think about students from other schools. I think sometimes we forget that. So if the student has transferred to your school, what about, and has been killed, what about the children he left, the friends he left behind? If he was killed in a car accident on the way to college, what about the kids in his graduating class? What about siblings? Many times I've gone to school systems where there's been a tragedy at the school, and one of the first questions we ask is, did this child have siblings, and where are those children? Because if he had a sibling in elementary or middle school, somebody needs to reach out there as well. And then, as I said in the very beginning, if a child has had a history of prior losses or any kind of emotional difficulties, then it's going to be important to seek them out. So I'm sure you're looking at this saying, okay, well, who's left? Oftentimes you will see that the ripple of the pebble in the pond creates many, many ripples that touch many, many, many students. So what are some things that we can do? Probably one of the most important things that you can do is to provide psychological first aid. And psychological first aid is really just recognizing that people are in distress. People are feeling extreme stress, and it's because of the situation that they find themselves in. So when we think about what it is, psych first aid is simply emotional support. It is information and education. And it's helping to recognize when children may have more significant problems that need your help as a counselor, and for you to recognize when children may have need more help than you can provide, and help connect them with specialists and experts in the community. When you provide psychological first aid, what you're really doing is to create a compassionate environment for everybody, the survivors of the disaster, people that work the disaster, people in the school system if there's been a loss that's touched the school community, and to figure out what a person may need at that particular time, and to give them some ideas of how to cope. PFA is becoming recognized as so important that there has been a shift to create some models of PFA that can help hopefully reduce the need of children and adults for further mental health services. Because what we know from the research is that if we can get in and provide support early, then we can reduce the numbers of individuals that may need more mental health support in the long run. And there just aren't enough of us. Now, I bet as some of you were filling out the poll that maybe there's one or two of you for hundreds of kids. And so if everybody can, if every teacher knows how to support children, then the children that need the most help can come to you. So I sometimes think about psychological first aid as CPR in a way, that everybody should know how to provide CPR, and I want to reserve the cardiac surgeon who hopefully knows how to provide CPR, but I want to reserve his skills for the surgery, and everyone else can provide the CPR. So there's a new model that's been developed that is the only model out there that's specifically for children, and this one is for teachers. And as a counselor, I think it is wonderful that you could learn this model and encourage and teach school personnel where you are. There is it's a series, and there's one for parents and one for teachers. And if we look at the teacher, I think, again, psychological first aid is not rocket science. It is something that everyone can learn to do. But part of it is just listening. It allows children to share their experience, to let you know about fears or concerns that they may have. But it's also helping families, helping teachers understand that it's not just the verbal, but the nonverbal, the child that is sitting in the back of the class and crying, the child in you know, a tornado hit area that the next time it rains is not paying attention in class because they're thinking about, is this going to be another tornado? So looking and listening to the nonverbal as well. And to listen for concerns that the child may have. It's okay not to fill in all the silence and to allow children to express themselves. I think we can give reassurance and support and encouragement. We can't say that I promise no one's ever going to die in your life again, but we can let children know that you're there, that you believe that as hard as this is, that you're there to help them get through this. I don't think you ever get over a loss, but we do get through it. And encouragement to rely on support systems and coping strategies that have worked in the past. I think it's important to listen for risk factors. What do you hear? You know, are their parents doing? How are their parents doing after the loss? How are they coping with the fact that a disaster has hit their house? Listen for exposure. Was the child right there? Was this somebody that witnessed the crisis firsthand? Or are they close friends to someone that died? And so sometimes helping to determine the loss will give you an idea of how high risk they are for intensive mental health services. So in the little booklet that you can just download on the Listen, Protect, and Connect, there's a checklist for families and for teachers to look at that gives ideas, 9 or 10 risk factors that will place a child at much higher risk. And these are risk factors that are primarily quantitative. It's not asking people to get into, you know, how are you feeling, but rather, did these things happen to you? And these have been found to be highly predictive of children that may need some extra help. I think as we work with children, it's important to validate what they've been through and support what they've done. Many children, it is very common after a loss or after a crisis to experience guilt and shame for things that they did or didn't do. And often these are extremely unrealistic. And wouldn't it be great if you just say, don't feel that way? I've had people so many times, just tell them not to feel that way. And I think, oh my gosh, wouldn't life be easy if I could tell all of the families I work with, all of the children I work with, well, no, don't feel that way, and that's my job, and I'm done in one session. It doesn't work that way. So how can we help support their self-worth? How can we help them come to recognize that they did what they could do at the time? It's important, as I said, structure is your friend, stability and predictability. So this is a good time to have routine and clear expectations. Schools will often ask you, how should we cope with behaviors that in the past received sanctions? And the answer is exactly the same. If it wasn't okay to hit other students before a disaster happened, then it shouldn't be okay to hit other students after a disaster happened. You may have a better appreciation of why some of these behaviors are occurring, but it's not okay for those behaviors to continue without intervention. Now, they may not have experienced the exact same crisis or the loss. They may have had other circumstances that they had to figure out how to cope with. And so listening for them to share that with you and to build on success from other situations that they had. I think as counselors, it's critical to keep your eyes and ears open and watchful for bullying that often happens after a disaster or a loss situation. Look at your school environment. Think about, are there things that could re-traumatize the child? And sometimes you may be able to help school administrators recognize that if there's been a death, maybe having that empty desk in the classroom may be very difficult for other children. If there's been flooding and you haven't repainted, the water line is still there. So helping them think through how to keep the environment as free of reminders as possible. It's not always possible, but as much as possible. I think media exposure, we are now able to be Johnny on the spot with everything. I think it's important to make sure that we reduce media exposure, particularly for young children and with older children, to really talk to them about it and to think through and develop safety plans. One of the most important things we can do is to help children connect, to help them connect with other important adults in their life, to work with school counselors, healthcare providers, and be connected to services, be connected to school activities, be connected to caregivers. The more connections children have, the more resilient they are in life. And then children take their cues from the important adults in their lives. So it's not that they can't see you distressed. The issue is, do they see you being able to pull it together and cope? That's the key. So be respectful and be patient with them, but let them know that you believe that we can get through this together. And be aware and make sure that teachers understand that children are listening all the time, even if they don't appear to be. I do think it's important to teach. I think it is very scary if I'm having intrusive thoughts, if I'm having flashbacks, if I'm having excessive worries, if I'm more irritable and I look in the mirror and I don't see myself as I used to be. When I know that this is common after a loss or a crisis, I do better. So I think it's important to teach children about what are common reactions. I think it's important to teach children coping strategies like how to relax. This is just where to find these materials. And I think it's also important to remember that students pick the who. Students decide who they're going to be comfortable talking to. So do the students in your school know who you are? If I'm never seen a counselor before, after a crisis is not the time that I'm going to seek out the counselor for help. I may seek out my math teacher. I may seek out the custodian or my homeroom teacher. So as much as you can, think through how can you be more visible in your school so if something or when something happens, you're available. I think most importantly, as you're communicating, you need to model that it's okay to talk about it, because students may be very overwhelmed, as we said earlier. Students are going to be much more likely to communicate if they believe that you're actually interested in talking about it. If they see you as somebody that's comfortable and that you give the impression that I'm here as available to you. I'm willing and able to talk about this. It's not going to be too upsetting for me to discuss. And if you've ever had the opportunity to discuss other crisis or difficult subjects in the past, when something else happens, they're more likely to turn to you. Just find a moment. You know, you can acknowledge the trauma or loss simply by stating, I'm sorry to hear about your home, about your grandmother, or whatever. Or I'm thinking about you, just something that says, I'm connected to you. And then allow the students' responses to guide you, but continue to check in. It's not, you have to tell me about what's happening. honest answers are important. Sometimes the best response we can say is, I don't know, but maybe we can figure it out together. Or I don't know why this happened. Let's talk about it. I think it's also good that you answer questions they have in as straightforward and honest way as possible, age appropriate. So what you would answer to a high school student is going to be different than a middle school student, than an elementary school student, and different from a college student, just as anything else. But be mindful, particularly with young children, about using euphemisms for death or loss, because they will not understand. He's taking a long nap. I'm never going to sleep again. Or, you know, he was such a fantastically wonderful man. God needed another angel. And all of a sudden, you don't understand how come Johnny is misbehaving all the time. Well, Johnny's not ready to be an angel yet. So you have to think about how do you want to communicate. And then we have our newest way of communicating. And how do we use the social network for good? So can you, for example, after a suicide maybe impacts a school, how can you post information about prevention and resources that are available? What are things that we can do? This is a nice way for the school to post if there's been a disaster, what the school is doing, so that if you have the opportunity, if there are resources, families can look that up. I think as we also look at school interventions, to think about other things, to come up with a plan for how do students leave the room to come and talk to a counselor. How do they leave the room if they need to collect themselves without having to raise their hand and saying, I'm having a horrible time? So what are some ways that schools can think about doing that? Choose an adult or a location at the safe space so they know where they can go, particularly for young children. Most schools have a policy that you can't call home unless you're going home because you're really sick. But if there's been a loss, then sometimes students need to check back in with their family to make sure everything's okay. So you may need to relax that rule for children that are directly impacted by the loss. You might also think about work assignment modifications, helping teachers figure out, do they really need to do 50 problems, or is 25 geometry problems sufficient for right now? And to allow for private time for them to talk with you. There are many triggers that can arise. So that may be triggers like listening to a song, hearing information, sights and smells may trigger those reactions again. And then there are all those special occasions, birthday, holidays, and lost opportunities. So think about that. Work with your school. You know, I had a friend of mine his little boy had a Donuts with Dad Day, which sounds great. You want to get fathers more involved in schools. Well, his dad was traveling on Donut for Dad Day, and his comment was, I can't participate because I don't have a dad there. Well, there are lots of reasons Dad may not be there. Dad may be deployed. Dad may be dead. Dad may be living in a divorce and living in another city. Dad may never have existed in the child's life to start with. So think about helping children define what is a dad, what is somebody that is a male figure that's important. So on Mother's Day or Father's Day or other things, how do all children feel like they can participate? But recognize, you know, as children get ready for recitals, I expected my mom to be there. I expected my dad to be there to help me fill out college applications. I expected to graduate with my whole class, and now my school has been destroyed in a tornado or in a hurricane. And how does that impact income, you know, the oil spill on the Gulf Coast, for example. But keep in mind that none of us, even if we go through the exact same event, are going to cope in the exact same way and on the exact same timetable, and that makes it hard. If I break my arm, I know in 6 to 8 weeks I'll be better. But grief and trauma don't proceed in that way. And so helping families, helping schools recognize that every child is going to have their own timeline of how they get through it. but taking the time in school to help children adjust is really going to help their academic achievement. I put this up there, and I think you all will get the slides. These are some really nice evidence-based and evidence-informed interventions for children after crisis and loss. And I encourage you to take a look at these websites and see them. There are several that can be applied in the school setting that you can learn to do. I know we're running out of time, so I want to make sure we have time for questions. I just have a couple more thoughts I want to put up there. Families are going to turn to you. If I'm at a loss, a school counselor may be the first person I go to say, help me with this. So you need to be prepared and ready to help families cope, be in communication with the family to give insight to what's going on at school, and with the school to give insights to help families. But you may be that bridge for families. There's a new resource, and it's absolutely free. Please, please, please take advantage of it. If you go to our website, we've developed a new resource for school personnel. And this is about an hour-and-a-half module on children and bereavement and what teachers and schools can do to help. If you go to the website, you can download the PowerPoint with notes for every single slide so you can give the presentation. And there's also a way to download the PowerPoint in a handout form for schools. So please take advantage of it. Email me if you have any questions about how to do it. It's absolutely free, but it would be a perfect way to do an in-service for your schools, because as you said in your polls, every one of you almost has had some experience with knowing that students are impacted by death and crisis on a fairly, unfortunately, regular basis. I think it's also important to recognize that trauma and loss can impact school personnel as well, so we're not immune to it. And so this may be something that you also have to do, is to support the school personnel as they cope with whatever crisis or loss has touched the school. And what are you doing? So as you listen to these stories, recognizing, please, that you are high risk for compassion fatigue. Look at what makes a person high risk. If you have empathy, if you don't, please go get a different career. But empathy puts you at high risk for compassion fatigue. If you're part of the community that was affected, you're at risk. If you've had similar experiences, oh, look at that. If you work with children, you're at higher risk. So do you have the resources for your own self-care? And I encourage you, I'm going to skip through this, I encourage you to really think about what are you doing to take care of yourself, and make sure that you do this. It's a trite comparison, but it rings so true. There's a reason why they tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself before someone else, because if you're passed out, you can't help anyone else. So make sure that you're doing what you can do to take care of yourself so you can better take care of children and families and school personnel that you work with. Because honestly, you can make a difference, and you sometimes don't know what a huge difference you can make to the child whose life has been touched by bereavement, that has been touched by loss. So take care of yourself as you take care of others. I encourage you to take a look. All of the resources on our website are free. We're available for free for technical assistance. Just call us if you have any concerns. There's guidelines that you can find for bereavement in general or crisis that touches a school. Here's some guidelines with sample letters to go out to school personnel, for messages to students, for messages to parents, and there's new guidelines that have just been posted related to suicide. So take a look. Again, let me know if there's anything that I can do to help as you move forward. And I think we have about 5 minutes, Jeff. I appreciate people staying with me. But again, I wish I could see your faces, because this has been the strangest thing for me. Any questions that have come in, or any thoughts that y'all have?
There are quite a few questions, actually.
Okay.
The first one comes from Melissa, and it's, I have two students, a brother and sister in 10th and 8th grade, who have just lost their dad to a heart attack 2 weeks ago. Today,
Okay.
the 8th grade girl has had 3 classmates who made fun of her because she lost her dad. What suggestions do you have on dealing with this?
Yes. You know, it is an interesting thing that happens when students have been touched by death, that other students who truly don't know how to cope, they cope by striking out. And it's unfortunate, but that happens all too often. I think there's a couple things that can be done. One is to make sure that that child has a good support system in her peers. Does she have close friends so that she is with them and they can help sort of promote a shield, if you will, that I've got your back, and helping her, talking with them, helping them understand that some people don't know what to say and they strike out in a very mean way, and that you're available to talk to them no matter what. I would also provide some resources to the family. Again, if you look on our website, there's a booklet. You can order 25 for free. Do it a few times. It's a booklet on supporting, for parents, on supporting children after a death. It was put together by folks from the National Center and with the funding from New York Life Foundation. And it's a very nice booklet, and I would recommend providing that to this family. They're free. Again, you can download them, but you can also order hard copies. I would think about getting this family, if it's been a little bit of time, into community grief groups. Most communities have wonderful programs for children of all ages as they try to cope with this. And to be there checking in, I would talk to the teachers about what's going on, making sure they're aware of it, and setting up a time, approaching the student, even if you don't know these kids, and saying, I understand what's happened. I want you to know I'm here, and let's figure out how I can support you.
Okay. The next question is from Alex. What types of therapy do you recommend when working with students going through a crisis or loss, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused brief therapy, etc.?
It depends on their level of distress. So I know that's an easy out. I'd start with psych first aid. Nobody is going to be harmed by psychological first aid. So every student may benefit from that. But then I would look. So trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is probably the gold standard for children that have experienced a significant trauma, including loss situations. But that's generally done individually. There is a 10-hour online free, if you go to the website that's on there, you can take that, and that allows you to be set up to take a 2-day training to become a TFCBT therapist. But the other one I would look at, particularly if you're in the schools, is CBITS, Cognitive Behavioral Intervention for Trauma in Schools. And this is really for middle and high school children that have experienced trauma and loss, that are having significant distress. And what they have found is these children, actually their grade points improve, expulsion goes down, suspension goes down. So just taking an hour and a half a week for about 10 weeks, even though it's removing them from a classroom setting, actually improve their outcome. And from a financial end for schools, not having to provide special services, having higher graduation rates, higher GPAs, and less behavior occurrences is a big plus to schools. The healing after trauma skills is something that can be done by you, in the classroom or in a group, for younger children, elementary and early middle, and that's free online as well. So there are several. I think the research consistently supports a cognitive behavioral focus for whatever intervention that you choose. There's several out there, but the data, no matter what the data is supporting, no matter what the name of it is, that the processes are rooted in the cognitive behavioral theories.
Okay. The next question is from Beth. Oh, I'm sorry. The next question is from Emily. If a student loses a sibling, how soon after the loss should a teacher go back to normal routines like homework, especially if the sibling was a student of the same school?
Oh, Emily, that's a great question. I think you're going to take some cues from the student and from the family. You don't want the student to be treated as too different. So if they come back and, oh, you don't need to take this test because of your sister, then I don't have any way to show you that I'm coping. So I think it's important to sit down with the child and to think through, how are you doing? What has it been like doing homework? Maybe modifying it for the first few weeks and then gradually building it back up. But you may take a cue from the child and the family as well. Ask them, how is this working for you? Tell me, because they're going to have a hard time learning some of that new information right away. I would also, and I'm sorry we don't have time for it, but you can look at some of the resources that are out there on our website and others around memorialization and commemoration, because that's a whole nother topic. But how do you deal with a death that occurs in a school when a student dies? How do you commemorate that? How do you memorialize that? Because there's some things that can go well and things that can go very poorly. And so particularly if you have a loss in the school and here's one sibling and she wants to know, what are you going to do to honor and to remember my sister or my brother, it can put schools in a very difficult situation. So I would encourage you to help schools plan ahead of the loss for how to handle death of a staff or a student so that they're well prepared when it happens around the memorialization and commemoration issue.
Okay. Now the next question is from Beth. I got a little ahead of myself before. What if a student wants to come to counseling a lot and not go to classes after a loss? Should we encourage a lot of counseling?
That is, I've been working with a couple of teenagers after a death by suicide, and the counselor is saying she's got them in her office more than they're in the classroom, and it's been months and months since the death. I think you can be supportive, but part of the way that we're supportive is helping students begin to return to the classroom setting. So it may be that you can come in at different times. I'm going to be here. If you're having a rough time in class, you can step out of class and come see me. But my goal is to help you figure out how to be successful in the classroom. So it's not that you say, I'm not going to give you any support in counseling. But part of what I'm going to do is help you be able to return to the classroom environment, because it may be that I'm coming to you because I'm being teased. It may be I'm coming to you because I don't know what to do with the feelings. It may be I'm coming to you because I don't know how to answer my peers when they ask me about my mom's death. So I would absolutely support and also then help them transition back into the classroom. There's a really nice webinar that's up right now that Scholastic just did on loss and children, with some nice video clips that if you Google Scholastic and webinar and loss, that will, a lot of the information is what I just presented to you, but I don't have the video clips that were done, and some of those are very poignant and speak to how children handle loss and what it's like for them and what they wish schools would do in their own words. The PowerPoint is probably almost exactly the same, but my boss did that one for Scholastic. I would also say we just finished I did some work with the American Psychological Association around talking to children around 9/11 as this 10th anniversary is approaching. And I would encourage you, if you do have children that have been impacted and or students are talking about it, schools are talking about this 10th anniversary, there are materials developed by the APA and Nickelodeon on how to talk to children around 9/11, how to teach around 9/11. So if you go to the apahelpcenter.org, there's a link to materials that have been developed, or to the Nickelodeon site for children ages about 7 to 14, 15, parents' guides, teachers' guides, a lot of material on how to talk to kids about 9/11.
Okay, the next question is from Carol. One of our second graders died in August after a year of battling cancer. His mom has worked at this school for 15 years. I'm getting resistance to doing anything. We are waiting and seeing how people are doing. Thoughts?
I can hear it in her voice. You don't wait. This really did affect the whole school community, particularly if this child's been in and out for a while. Children need the opportunity to express their feelings and their sense of loss with this student, and for school personnel to support this staff member. So I think it is really important to think about how does the school want to begin to remember, and to step back a little. And again, I would take a look at some of the materials on commemoration, maybe meet with the staff member about this. She may not be ready, and so it's hard, but waiting is usually not the best idea, but I think you can support her about what some of the difficulties about talking about it, about dealing with it in the large school setting, and figure out what does she want, what do her siblings want, what do the friends think may be a way to honor this student's life. And I've got about 2 minutes, and then I have a conference call I run, and I have to join that at 10 after 4. I'm sorry that we're getting close to being out of time.
Okay, there's really 2 more questions, and
Okay.
I'm sure they can be done pretty quickly.
Okay.
Well, actually,
if I limit what I say.
Actually, there's 3 more questions, but the first one is from Alex again, and can this information be used with adults such as staff members and not just students?
Absolutely, positively. Staff members are hurting too, and sometimes as adults we're reticent to accept information. You know, you hold something that says your community's just been through a crisis, come and learn how to cope, and nobody shows up. You hold something that says your community's just been hit by a crisis, come and learn how to support your children, everybody shows up. So a lot of times you can use the same information with school personnel that may not be as open to it, but if you can couch it in a way that by learning this information you can better support students, that also can help them as well.
Okay. Alice asked, do you have memorials at the schools for lost ones? Is that a good idea?
That is, I mean, honest to goodness, Alice, that's a whole nother webinar. How you hold memorials at schools become a very tricky issue, because the overriding thing has to be what you do for one, you have to do for all. And there's a lot of discussion around, do you do it at school? What is that like for students that maybe didn't know the person, or for students that are uncomfortable with that? So I hate to deflect, but I would strongly, strongly encourage taking a look at the guidelines that have been developed. I can cite you to our center, or look at some of the guidelines that are out around suicide, particularly either at our center or the suicide prevention lifeline, and it will give you some ideas and pointers for how to deal with memorializations the pluses and minuses with that very question.
Okay, and the last question that I see is from Rebecca, and it is it a good idea to sit down with the family and teachers to set up a plan on how to get it back on a regular routine?
Yeah, Rebecca, I think that's really nice. If you have the opportunity to sit down with families and say, you know, what can we do to help? That's our job, is to support your family that's struggling through a very difficult time. You know, offer them materials if you have them. You know, print them out and give them to them. Families, they may not read them right then, but they'll be very grateful later because they're not listening right away. Come up with a plan. When is your child coming back to school? How can we stay in touch? How do we stay connected to make sure we're all supporting your child as they go through a very difficult time? And also making sure that the teacher's aware of what's happening, because sometimes teachers are unaware, and so they may not realize that the child is struggling. Maybe they don't know that the child just lost their grandmother who's been living with them for the last 5 years or whatever. So I think it's a really good idea. If you have the opportunity to sit down with the family, that's tremendous. And I think that's it. Thank y'all very much for sitting in. Again, if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. I lost you.
Sorry. Thanks so much. I was on mute. I apologize.
Okay, no problem. So thanks very much, and I appreciate it. Seriously, just email me if there's anything else that I can do.
All right. Thank you very much, and everyone have a very good day.
Bye.